Welcome to the Find Your Leadership Confidence podcast with Vicki Noethling. You are about to discover impactful lessons that help you grow as an individual, grow your confidence, and find the positive and good within you, so you powerfully and authentically become the best version of yourself. Be sure you visit our website at www.findyourleadershipconfidence.com. While you're there, subscribe to us via your favorite network. Now tune in, get ready, and enjoy the journey of emerging as a leader of exception in the 21st century.
Welcome, everyone, to the Find Your Leadership Confidence podcast. I'm your host, Vicki Noethling, coming to you from Roswell, Georgia. The goal of this podcast is to bring topics and guests that empower you to become that confident leader and take your business and your life to the next level. Today, I am excited to talk to John Chan. Let me tell you a little bit about John. He is an entrepreneur renowned for his expertise in web, UX, design, and digital marketing. Born in Hong Kong, raised in Vancouver, John dropped out of university at age of 19 to start his own web design consultancy. Since then, he has worked for several prestigious companies, including UBC and Basecamp, before co-founding 2X Growth Agency. The agency specializes in helping e-commerce and DTC brands grow and scale with paid ads and ad creative development. Under John's leadership, 2X Growth Agency has managed over $6 million of ad spend and helped generate over $30 million in revenue for their clients. With his diverse background and extensive experience in entrepreneurship, John is highly engaging and insightful speaker for any event or podcast. So we are going to talk about what he knows best, which is entrepreneurship, and hopefully that will be able to give you all out there some great ideas and tips. So today, I would like to welcome my guest, John Chan. John, welcome.
Hi, Vicki. Thank you so much for the introduction. I'm glad to be here.
So you said where you were born, you said where you ended up. Are you still in Vancouver, or where are you today?
I'm still in Vancouver today. Yep. Team is remote, but most of the core team is based in Vancouver.
Awesome. Excellent. So I'd first like to have you give a little bit of your backstory. So you touched a little bit, you teased us a little bit in your intro, but tell us, what was it like for you and this journey coming from Hong Kong? And I don't know how old you were when you came over, and then deciding to drop out of university and all this. Just tell us that story. I always find it interesting.
No, for sure. So I moved here when I was 6. And so I basically grew up here. And I think what's interesting about that per se is that I'm bilingual, and I come from an environment where, my parents spoke Chinese at home, and I had to figure out just like my identity growing up. And there was a lot of that kind of like narrative of like, who am I? What am I good at? And those type of things. And so like any kid, my parents would put me through, they put me through school, but they also put me through a lot of extracurricular things and activities. And one of those things that really stuck with me was Taekwondo. And so it was one of those things that as a kid, my dad watched a lot of martial arts movies. He was really into it. And so he put all three boys. So I'm the third kid, all 3 boys through Taekwondo. And for me, it kind of gave me a space that's outside of extracurricular, outside of like the classroom, where I could really sort of explore my boundaries of like, if I were to compete or if I were to develop this kind of skill, like how far could I go with this thing? But for the large part of my childhood, it was very, it was somewhat directionless. I was just kind of going with the flow of what was in front of me at the time. And one of the first sort of chance sort of encounters that was really important was the Canadian national competition was in my hometown. And so, kind of like signed up on a whim, right? But what that exposed me to was that at the time was that as you participate in the nationals, you'll be doing what's effectively BC team training, which is, I'm from BC, Vancouver. And so, in our province, we'll have provincial team training. And so it started exposing me to the different training styles and the skill sets of other athletes from other schools. And so that kind of really opened up the importance of the environment that I was in and kind of skills I was developing, because it made me realize that in the old school, that was the original school that I was part of, that we were basically capped out with what we were able to do in the sport that I really flourished in. But it kind of set me this notion that the environment that you're in is very important for your development. And so there's a lot of things that happen in between. I'll skip all that. Fast forward when we get into university, it was that sort of same gnawing feeling that I started questioning whether if that was sort of the if it was for me. And in all through high school, I was generally good as a kid. I studied well, I got A's and what have you, but I wasn't very engaged, I think is what it came down to. And so in university, growing up, I wanted to be an animator. And I didn't get into an animation program. I went to university for fine arts. And so I just felt like at the time I was just not making the most of my time. I wasn't learning fast enough. And so again, going back to my Taekwondo career, I was at a competition with a teammate and introduced this book to me, Rich Dad Poor Dad. And I remember flying to Korea open. On my flight there, I was reading the book, and on my flight back, I decided that I need to do something outside of school. And so I decided to drop out that semester. And that was in 2006. So it's been
just before the crash.
Just before the crash, exactly.
Oh.
But I never looked back since. And so I'll pause there. But that was kind of like the backstory of like one thing that led to another and kind of the thought process.
Wow, that's cool. Very cool. So whenever you made that change, I imagine those around you, parents especially, might not have been as thrilled. I teach public speaking to adults and kids, and one group is a Chinese academy, and I'm doing right now 9-year-olds, and the parents are very much pushing them to do all these extra things to be able to stand out in the crowd. So what was the reaction of your friends, your family, when you said, hey, this is where I'm going?
What's interesting about that is that I had my parents were more supportive, and they were cautious. They're like a little nervous, as they should be, right? Like 19, you're a kid, right? And so like how much do you really have conviction about the direction that you're headed to?
Yeah.
But it was lucky that because around that time I was already pretty serious about my Taekwondo progression in my career. I was competing nationally every year, and I was doing things that basically no one asked me to do, right? And so I wasn't particularly lazy at the time. I trained, like many times a week, trying to work towards, winning nationals and all that. And so because of that, I think it gave them a sense of assurance that if I was going to go do something, that I wasn't just going to like sit around and watch TV all day and what have you. And of course, in practice, it was also kind of hard to start your own business because there's this self-discipline and there's a lot of little things that come along with running a business. And one of my first major lessons was that even though it had the technical skills of learning how to build web pages from high school, the practicalities of running a business and the operations and the client management was a completely different skill set. But then it just, again, spoke to the fact that if I wanted to learn something, it was going to push me in that direction. And because they saw that part of that, I'm trying to figure things out, I think that gave them some ease that, I could explore this. And so I think the short answer, of what they felt and what helped was that because I had something else that gave them some evidence that I was not going to waste my time, it gave them some assurance that, if anything else, I could always go back to school. It was always that in the back pocket. And so I think that kind of like, what you could always go back to was kind of the thing that gave them a sense of assurance.
Yeah, you really demonstrated to them 2 or 3 qualities of a great entrepreneur: is that consistency, persistency, and the, really self-driven to do things because, we're out here on an island oftentimes. Did you seek any coaches to help you in the business aspect of it as you were going?
So the short answer is yes, but not at the time. And so, when I started doing all of that, I would say that again, going back to the importance of environment, um, I would argue that I actually wasn't consistent. I wasn't persistent. Well, I was persistent, but I wasn't very consistent. And I later learned
Oh,
afterwards that, I had, as an adult, I had ADHD, which also kind of explained a lot of the earlier thought
oh yeah,
processes that I didn't
yeah.
realize was happening at the time. But again, the environment was that even if I had that self-deficiency or skill set, that was skill gap or what have you, I was surrounded by people that kind of nudged me in that right direction. And
Right.
so mentorships and having people show me the way was really important. So I'll go back to the book that I read. After I read Rich Dad Poor Dad, I started looking for people that were running businesses because I was interested at the
Yeah.
time. And I'm like, oh, I wonder who else is doing these things in the book. So I would go to these networking events. And I remember, one of the person that took me out a lot after saying, "Hey, I'm reading this book. You seem to be doing that. What's that about?" And then that led to, okay, well, why don't you come over here? Uh, we competed together. It was an athlete. It was a friend of mine, and he also ran a restaurant. And so what we would do is at competitions, I'll ask him about these things in the evenings. And when we went back to our city, he was like, "Just come out on a Saturday. I'll bring you out and I'll show you what's going on." And so I just had that kind of guidance both from
Nice.
on a level, but also in a coaching level. I worked with an Olympic coach, and that had a lasting impression on me because
Yeah.
he had a certain standard for how he does things, and I just saw that that's just the way you do things when you want to do well in any particular field. And so I think all of those things kind of set me the right path, even if I personally didn't have the innate certain things, but I had the
Hmm.
innate curiosity.
Very good. So one of the things you have, you talk about is so as business. What is so as business?
I'm not sure either. What do you mean by that?
It's you have it spelled as S-O, or actually maybe it was a typo. Is it a SaaS business maybe?
SaaS business, probably. That's what
Yeah,
it
so
comes
I
down
think it
to.
was a typo
No,
from
that's okay. Perfect. No, I'm glad you asked. So yeah, so SaaS stands for software as a
Mhm.
service, right? And so it's basically software, meaning if you go to a website and there's an account that you sign up for in order for you
Mhm.
to use and engage with that product, that's the category of websites that we work with. And so what you're alluding to is that in our line of work in our agency, we primarily serve DTC e-commerce brands, so direct to consumer brands,
Mhm.
where they sell, it could be Amazon, it could be on Shopify, where they have a website where customers can engage with them directly, as opposed to, going through wholesale through like a brick and mortar store or distributor or that kind of thing.
Right.
So we primarily work with that. But then the other category that we're going to work with are SaaS businesses. So if you're a software company with a sign up or a subscription business model, we generally work very well with those type of companies as well.
Awesome. So we are touching on e-commerce, so we'll just keep on going down that road. And before we started this, I was telling you, I was around when e-commerce started, and so, and that was interesting because obviously it started, and then 2008 hit, and all those things that we were doing were kind of halted. So talk to us about where e-commerce is today, though.
Hmm. So what's interesting about e-commerce today is that it's getting more and more prevalent. And you see companies like Shopify, first they went public, but if you look at their year-over-year growth and changes, last Black Friday they did $9.2 billion in sales in total revenue for the store owners. And it's unprecedented because it was up, like I think it was like 11% before the year
Mhm.
prior, but it's a reflection of the fact that consumers are more comfortable buying and spending online than they used to. And so if I forget about the broader trends for a second, if you as a listener or if you ask yourselves, look at your consumer habits, your chances are, if you look at your share of wallet between this year versus the year prior, you're probably spending more and more comfortable to spending and buying products online. And when you allude to this and compare this against 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 15 years ago, the idea of processing a credit card and putting on a website that you're not familiar with somewhere out there, And just trusting that you're actually going to receive product, there's a lot of trust factors and barriers
Mm-hmm.
that are no longer just in question today. It's so ubiquitous that we know and trust and believe that if I went to buy something, I'll probably get it. And if I don't, I know what the repercussions are. I can have chargebacks. I have a sense of assurance that I can do different types of things that I can recover money.
Yeah.
So there's no sense of like, fraud or issues like
Right,
that
right.
that we don't have today in our environment, but it still exists in other countries, in other environments where they don't have the proper infrastructure for. And so, in
Mm-hmm.
that sense, what the internet has given us, and as a byproduct with e-commerce, is that it's given a lot of entrepreneurs and opportunities to start businesses in a way that was not available to us 20
Right.
years ago or 30
Mm-hmm.
years ago. Today, if you want to sign up for a store, you go create an account, you pay $50 per month, you find a supplier of your product, and you can start testing right away. 10 years ago, 20 years ago, that would have been very prohibitive, not from just a technical sense, but also from the sense of, hey, if I have this idea, how do I go from idea to execution? A lot of that
Right.
friction has been removed today, which is why we're in a very, very interesting and unprecedented environment.
Yeah. I was just talking to someone at I do to get a discount in my favorite clothes.
Mm,
I go and work every so often at a retailer,
mm,
and so one of the customers today was talking about her husband and how she has to buy the clothes for him, and then she brings them back all the time. And I mentioned that my husband just buys online,
mm,
and the store that I am working at has decided not to do online, but
mhm.
they had made a comment today that their sales are down, and I just kind of smiled because I think that they're missing a huge opportunity for those that, want to take advantage of these great prices and designers, but they don't always want to or can come into the store.
Absolutely. And I think that's reflective of just the changes in our environments, both the options that we have available to us as consumers, but also as a business owner, we have to pay attention to what's happening within the market. What are new technologies that are coming out? What are shifting tools and demands? And just being able to keep up. It, on one hand, I empathize with that because it's a lot. There's a lot of changes and it's hard to keep
Hmm.
up. But on the other
Right.
hand, it's imperative. If you don't, that's
You're going
how
to be
companies and
gone.
businesses exactly.
Yeah.
And so
Hmm.
on one hand, these changing environments could be an advantage if you're comfortable and open and willing to adapt to the changes. And it's both the wonderful thing and the difficult thing because things can move really quickly. It'd be hard to keep up. On the other hand, it also opens up new doors and opportunities. And so it's
Yeah.
kind of like which side of the fence you want to be on.
Right. Right. So you talked about being an ex-athlete and a businessman and all the things that come with that. I'm sure that, there's part of the audience out there that are in that same boat. They had a career, they had a stay at being an athlete. Well, now there's, what else? So, um, why, and I think you touched a little bit, but why do you think that perhaps you have a little bit more of an edge as an entrepreneur because you were an athlete? Can
Hmm.
kind of expand a little bit more about that, because I think, that's important to those that even maybe aren't athletes to understand why it's an advantage or how they might change their behavior to model that perhaps.
For sure. So the short answer is because our individual stories and our paths is what makes us unique. And in my case, that was my path. But maybe for you, maybe you're a chess player, maybe you're a musician, maybe you have some other vocation, maybe in arts, what have you, that what's interesting is that when you ask anyone that has a very deep passion or experience in one particular field and you ask them about something that's tangentially related, like say in business or in their work, they can always find some very obscure reference for how that applies to them. And so
Mm,
for me, it's no different than that. But that knowledge that your core sort of upbringing and your experiences bleeds into your work or your life in any particular way is usually how I find out my own individuality and uniqueness and my strength and nurturing that aspect of it, but also in the people that we work with. And so as I look at different companies and businesses, you often find that the origin story for why they started the businesses are related to some, maybe like
yeah.
offhand story or comment. or about what kind of problem they solved. But same thing for your staff or your employees or your partners. They have really interesting insights. And so being cognizant of that and being aware of that and then bringing that to light and then figuring out how do you utilize it in a unique manner is often very, very interesting, and how you can get the most out of the people that you work with, in the sense that they find it more enjoyable because it can bring a unique take that very few people can also bring. But it also gives you a sense of confidence that, yeah, you're good at this because you have this available to you. And so for me, Taekwondo was one of those things where it gave me a sense of I like to think of as what was the bar for being a certain percentile in a particular field, right?
Mhm.
And so, if when I think about my career in that environment, I don't think I was necessarily cut out to be the best athlete. So when I was trying to aim for towards Olympics, I don't think I would have made the cut, because there's a certain set of conditions that you require. But it got me really far just by not quitting. And it got me really far by just giving me the right environment, the right schools. And so it gave me a sense for how do you become really good in any particular field. And so what it taught me was, what was the stakes to get into any field? So if you look at my career, we haven't really touched on this except for the introduction. There's kind of three major arcs, right? I was a designer for a good period, and then I was
Mhm.
a software engineer for a certain period. And now I'm in as a marketer of a third period. And if I talk about my own history, it's like, how do you do that? How do you transition from like one
Yeah.
completely different field for a different one and still build a career around that? And so for me, it was easy because I had one core skill, which was I was very good at going from 0 to 60 in that particular field, because I know what the progression was. That's what
Mhm.
martial arts taught me. And so that's why it wasn't a hard field for me to get into, especially if I can take the previous set of experiences and bring it into my next one. And so, in that sense, that's how that field, or being in athletics, helped me in my career. And it allowed me, it extends to also the way that I consult. When I meet with new brands, I just know that I'm very good at learning things quickly, and I can bring a breadth of experiences and a breadth of insights from different fields because I can tap into that. But for a lot of us listening to this at home, chances are you guys have this, you just overlooked it because
Mhm.
nobody thought about it that way or asked you about it that way before. But
Mhm.
every time you really ask, they're like, oh yeah, I am really good at that because I can uniquely do this.
Yeah. And what I was thinking about, as you've been telling your story, is that you weren't expert the first time you tried each of those three paths that you took. You
Of course.
probably failed and learned and failed and learned, and that's how you got that practice to get better. So talk about that as a business owner, the dealing with failure as a positive as opposed to a negative.
Of course. I mean, failure is like feedback, right? A lot of times when you get into any field, it's easy to have a certain expectation. And I think for myself, what I was really good at was I was really good at like going through the period that I sucked at something. And
Mm.
so, running the agency, for example, the hardest part about building the agency was actually doing sales. I was technically very good, right? But if you look at those three fields, like a lot of them didn't require me to convince anyone of anything. I just had to like go sit behind a computer and do stuff. And
Yeah.
so learning that process was what's particularly challenging for me. And there's a lot of personality quirks and things that comes at play as well. But going back though, it was understanding the progression that was needed in order to get to the other side. And some days it's harder than others. But I think, if you can find, and a lot of different people have different ways of getting around the sense of
Yeah.
failure. But I think for me over the years is, one, having a strong sense for myself from my original training of like, how do you just deal with like getting beat up all over time? Like in that field, you physically get beat
Mm.
up if you were bad at something. Right. And so I think I had that like sort of physical sort of like, memory of like what I needed to do. But I think outside of that, the other part was just having was important was having a strong support network, where if I evaluated myself because of the failures or whatever, a lot of people around me didn't evaluate me in that way. And because I had that support from other people, it kind of kept me grounded, so that even if I had to go through a tough period, which you inevitably would, going down this path, you had the right environment and support to kind of pick yourself back up to get to the
Mm.
next thing. And so I think a lot of times when I think about business now, it's just how do you not die in business, right?
Yeah.
And just going back to like the sports, I wasn't particularly cut out for it, but because I outlasted everybody, I got really far. And so in that same
Mhm.
sense, I think of business in that way now.
Yeah, for sure. Well, time has flown by. I just wanted to have one last question before we move on. You have a husband and wife team. So talk to us about the challenges and the opportunities in having a husband and a wife team.
What's funny is that the actual advice, if I were to give one, is basically don't do it. But it's one of those, no, but you know what though? I say that with a lot of love and because I think we have a great team between me and my wife, but it's really hard. And it's hard because there's a lot of inherent challenges, because when it works, it really works. And the advice is kind of akin to like why you would tell someone to never start a company with your credit card, even if you do it yourself anyways, because you need a certain sense of vocation and conviction that it's really the right thing for you. And for us, what made it really work was, I think, a sense of, I would say, self-awareness that if we were making mistakes or, like dealing with power dynamics in the wrong way or what have you, we're able to basically back off from that, and we won't let that affect the personal relationship. And because we're able to deal with that, I think it allowed us to make it really work. And so the great things about it, I'll start with the positives, is that you'll have someone that really is aligned with you, in the sense that if you run into any type of problems at work, they know exactly what it's about. And so the kind of empathy and understanding you have within a partner, like, it's unprecedented, and I wouldn't trade it for anything else. Even the lifestyle aspects too, or we go on business trips or what have you, there's a lot of really interesting advantages that it's like, wow, it's so cool that we get to work together. But on days that are hard, it gets really tough. And I think the if you are going down this path, or you're already in this path, what really worked for us was that when business goes well, when things are going well, it's easy to be together, right? And that's true for any partnership, not just working with your wife. But it's when you run into challenges. And so I think if you look at the mark of what made it really work for us, was we look at how we fight. And I think we fought very well. We were respectful about it, and we didn't lead into personal relationships. And we've always, but again, it's really hard though. I still say that like that. But because I think we fought well over the years, and we watch each other grow, and we nurtured ourselves, and we're mostly supportive of each other. I think it worked really well for us in the long run. But it's one of those things where it's like, tread carefully, because if it really works for you, it's really going to work. If it doesn't, it could be very dangerous.
Yeah, for sure. Great advice. All right. Well, it is time now for me to share my screen. So if you've been listening and have not been taking notes, then you need to go and run and get a pen and paper right now so you can take down the contact information, although everything will be on my YouTube channel, Vicki Noethling. Please subscribe, or my findyourleadershipconfidence.com website. So John's website is 2x.agency, 2x.agency. On LinkedIn, Instagram, and Twitter, you can find him at JT, like Tom, CCHAN. JT Chan, JTC Chan, JTC Chan, and JTC Chan. All three, LinkedIn, Instagram, and Twitter. I believe that he loves LinkedIn the best. So I'm going to turn over to John to talk about his call to action today.
No, I mean, for anyone listening that wants to have a follow-up conversation, even if you're interested in a personal journey or a problem that you're running into, I'd love to connect. Best way to just find me is you can reach out to any of the social platforms. I'll respond there. Or if you have an interest in what we're doing as an agency, we do marketing for DTC e-commerce brands. You can always book a free inquiry on our website at 2x.agency. I'd love to meet with you and see if we could help. So, Vicki, thank you for having me. This is a fun chat.
Excellent. Well, John, it has just been wonderful chatting with you. You gave wonderful advice, and loved hearing your stories about your background, and look forward to future interviews to see where you're going next and what you're going to do. So, as always, I remind everyone that life is a journey, and it's up to you to enjoy the ride. This is Vicki Noethling signing off.
Thank you for tuning into the Find Your Leadership Confidence podcast with Vicki Noethling, where we share impactful lessons that help you grow as an individual, grow your confidence, and find the positive and good within you so you powerfully and authentically become the best version of yourself. Remember to visit our website at www.findyourleadershipconfidence.com and enjoy even more great episodes like this one. Again, while you're here, subscribe to us via your favorite network. We look forward to seeing you next time on the Find Your Leadership Confidence podcast.